There was one cool moment where it all worked together for everybody. The far angry left, the squad, the progressive caucus.
The far angry left
and the center left.
Please, call me Mr. Angry Left. But it doesn't make sense. The far angry left was my father.
Mr. Far Angry Left.
Reporter and author of the new book, The Squad, AOC, and the Hope of a Political Revolution, Ryan Grimm.
Here you go.
Welcome to the show. Thank you. Ooh, this is good. The one we have at the office is just a printout.
I know.
Now this is a real physical book.
Real
Look at that. I like the matte cover. I like the matte,
Yeah,
it feels real and it's not
rich
shiny.
and
It does. It does. It feels like that. Yes. Okay, let's talk about this book for a second. So, one thing that I think is interesting is this book, since it's been released, has gone through a news cycle like The Squad.
Yes.
Which is interesting and I think a good place to start. So conservative outlets got their hands on the book and started taking parts of it out of context to blow up fights between Democrats, disagreements between AOC and Nancy Pelosi, misrepresents disagreements or discussions between people like Pramila Jayapal and the Squad. Can you talk a little bit about just what happened?
Yeah, it's been surreal to watch it unfold because I covered this period, and by this period I mean, say, like 2018 and 2019 when the Squad is first coming into office and becoming this phenomenon. They all had, and AOC in particular, had a higher name identification with Republicans for the first year and a half of their time in office than they did with Democrats because of the 24/7 right-wing ecosystem just blasting them, just calling them every single name in the book. And people would, eventually some of it would break through, but because the ecosystems are divided, we wouldn't see, unless you're following it, you wouldn't see a lot of this stuff they were saying unless Trump jumps in and makes it a national story by saying, send them back. Or, if they don't like it here, they can go back and fix their own countries, which is, they're all American citizens. It's just idiotic stuff from Donald Trump. And so I'd watched that, and I'd watched the way that it's absorbed and mediated through Congress and how they experienced that. But then you're exactly right. About a week before the book came out, it starts popping up in the Daily Mail and Fox News and New York Post, and they would take it was, and I finally I could really understand from their perspective what it was like. So just for one example, there's one guy that's quoted talking about the rollout of the Green New Deal, saying that it was this one particular part was a cluster.
This is the part where there was a fact sheet that hadn't, I think, been vetted carefully enough, and it made reference to cows and methane. Republicans then took that and said AOC wants to get rid of hamburgers.
Right, yeah. And so that part, everybody already agrees. No, nobody would actually disagree that particular little part was a cluster.
Right.
Yeah. So what they do is they take that, they put it in my voice rather than somebody else, and then say that I said that the entire Green New Deal is a cluster and a disaster. Never said anything like that. It's just and just on and on throughout this coverage, and then each article would then kind of use the false stuff in the last article and then make it even more false, like a game of telephone, except it didn't start with something true, and then by the end of it, it was just so wildly distorted. It was amazing.
Well, and I think there was a debate after. At this point, I've lost all track of time and reality.
Same.
But there was a mini debate. This debate has happened many times, where the question is, when Democratic moderates in swing districts who have legitimate political challenges and who view their success as candidates resting on their ability to persuade moderates and independents in their districts, which is a real phenomenon that is a serious challenge for them. At times, there would be an intra-democratic debate that says the Squad, the left of the party, is making my job impossible. That I'm being painted by their brush. The sort of, those are the players, but then you step back and you see the game,
right.
And that there is this big media apparatus that exists to elevate not just the left, but the kind of missteps, worst examples, worst messages of the left. And I'm just wondering how you think about that, because the Democratic Party does have, we are a big party that has to have space for AOC and the squad, but also people in Michigan and Ohio and swing suburban districts that need to win as well.
That is a very real problem. And I think what Democrats can most effectively do about it is not attack each other over it. So often you will have, say, Fox News pick up something, distort it, flip it, and then fire it back at Democrats. And then you get this entire cycle of Democrats getting asked, do you condemn this thing? And you're seeing a bunch of like House resolutions on the floor now, like, do you condemn this? Do you condemn that? How often have you condemned it? How specifically have you condemned it? And there was a recent resolution where you had something like 90 Democrats just vote present on it. And I thought that was actually an interesting and smart step forward, where it's like, you know what? We can't win this game. Like, we're not going to win it. And I think the center left Democrats who are concerned about this phenomenon from left over to right, then coming back on the center left, should read this book, should listen like directly to the left, so that when they start hearing this stuff, they'll be like, oh, that actually doesn't sound right. Let me not amplify that. And then anybody in the party who is amplifying that stuff should be disciplined if they're doing it in a bad faith, dishonest way.
So AOC as a political figure clearly, I think, has kind of two big strengths. One is the strength of her worldview, an ideological worldview that clearly like has a lot of purchase, especially with a lot of engaged young people who are upset, angry, disappointed, frustrated, hopeless, and looking for someone who carries that torch. And on the other is the fact that she is an incredibly charismatic and smart and capable and persuasive messenger. As you were working on this, how much did you think about personality-driven politics versus ideologically driven politics?
So I think it's both, and I'll tell you like one story that I reported through the book and curious for your take on this, because I bet you will have encountered some of this yourself. So you have to imagine, she comes in, cold to politics. Like, she was reading about politics. She's smart. She went to Boston University. So she's like an engaged person. She was a volunteer for the Bernie Sanders campaign, but she's never served in office. She hasn't worked professionally on a campaign. So all of this is new to her, which wasn't the case for the squad. They'd all served in lower offices, the rest of the squad. And so very early spring of 2019, the budget is coming around, the appropriations budget. So she tells her staff, all right, look through here and tell us where we can add amendments. Like, we're in Congress, that's what we do. Like, we're going to amend this thing. And the staff comes back to her and they're like, hey, so Democrats control the House. Every presidential candidate, as opposed to the Hyde Amendment. The Hyde Amendment is long-time federal law that says you can't use federal money for abortions. Every national Democrat is against this. We control the House. Biden was getting hammered at this exact time for his long-time support of the Hyde Amendment. He would soon flip and be for it. So she's like, this is a layup. This is a mistake. Like, let's put an amendment that takes the Hyde Amendment out. Like, that's what our values are. It's in our platform. This is easy. So staff's like, okay, great. They call the subcommittee. They're like, this is what we're going to offer. And they're like, yeah, about that. She gets a call from Rosa DeLauro, a member of Congress, one of the most outspoken, pro-choice members in the House, who kind of tells her, like, look, Republicans aren't going to let this pass. And if we put it on the floor, it's going to put a lot of moderate Democrats in a difficult position. And she's like, okay, well, thank you for this. And so then they call Planned Parenthood and they call NARAL, the major pro-choice organizations in Washington. They're like, we'd like to fight for this. Like, we believe that we should stand up, with our chest and say that we support abortion rights fully. And they're like, yeah, about that. So we don't actually want you to push a vote on this. They're like, well, why? They're like, well, it would put Democrats who are in swing districts in a difficult spot, because some polling in some districts shows that people are pro-choice, but they don't want taxpayer money going towards abortion. But you guys are Planned Parenthood, and you guys are. She's like, yes, we support it, and it's in our mission to support it, but we need Democrats to be in power in order to then eventually enact those laws. And so they invite her to come meet with a group of reproductive justice groups. That meeting never happens. So she's still like, this doesn't make sense. Like, we support this. Like, let's at least have a vote on it. And so then she talks to Ayanna Pressley, member of the squad, who was chairing a caucus for pro-choice rights. She's like, I'm going to handle this. And I'm doing an amendment. And the way she ended up writing the amendment, they learned later, it was kind of deliberately written in a way that it would not pass the Rules Committee. So it would get a debate kind of in the Rules Committee, but then it would not make it to the floor, so they don't have to, so that nobody gets put in this difficult position. And so as she's like seeing how things are done here, she's absorbing, she's getting it. She's like, okay, I understand the point that's being made here. But from her perspective also, at some point you have to actually fight for something. And so the book is kind of about when you choose those moments to fight, and when you say, okay, you know what? We're not going to win this right now, so we live to fight another day. And I think more often she wants to pick the fight. But so far, I think what you've seen with her is somebody who is now kind of much more accepted by the rest of the party, because I think she has kind of accepted some of these tactical lessons. And so there's a poll that I sort of end the book with, where New Hampshire voters were asked who their favorite Democrat was, and what shocked her and shocked me when it came out, it was her. Like, this, you would not have expected, like 5 years ago, this kind of controversial figure who is being used to kind of divide other Democrats would now be in a position with having the highest approval rating of any Democrat in the kind of first primary state.
And also someone that has now faced some criticism from the left for
right, probably not unrelated. Yeah.
Right, not unrelated, but like sort of, what did we ever get for AOC? She's now just a normie Dem. She's all these things. I do think it's fascinating to watch it unfold, because I do think it's a challenge to understand, like, when is it your job? When is the role of the left to accept what's possible, and when is the role of the left to change what's possible?
And to question it. Look, you guys are wrong. We actually can do more. Right.
And I think a left that always says we shouldn't accept our current realities is a left that will be pushed aside.
Right.
But a left that goes along and doesn't pick the fights when necessary is a left that isn't doing its job. And I don't think anyone has a good, there's no good answer. There's no magic formula for how to do this. Yeah.
And this is a book kind of about, how they all have tried to find that balance on their own.
It is amazing that so much of this has fallen on the shoulders of someone who was new to politics, who his success is born not just of kind of representing this view, but doing it so well. I mean, I've gone to interview AOC a couple times, and she is, I think, one of the great messengers in the Democratic Party, in politics, who has an ability to kind of tell a story and do so carefully. Sometimes I think more carefully than other figures on the left. And I think sometimes that blowback is not a resentment of AOC, but the resentment of reality.
Right. Yeah. I can see that. Yeah. For sure. Yeah. There's another quick moment in there where there's this. Do you remember the TurboTax blow up?
I do.
So just as this is coming up, she reads this article and tries to find other people that will do something about this.
So just so people understand this, basically, taxes are stupid, and the way we file them are incredibly stupid, and these services like TurboTax and all these other kind of businesses thrive on a system that doesn't need to exist. That a lot of what we do when we file taxes could happen automatically, but it isn't allowed to happen, because if it did, this business would be eliminated. Yeah,
and so there's a bill that is then going through the House, Democratic-controlled House, that would make it illegal for the IRS to make its own free TurboTax system. And after the ProPublica article comes out, nobody's willing to stand up against it. And she and her aide are like walking down to the House floor. They're gonna object to it. They're gonna work to get it out. She goes into the cloakroom. Jon Lewis is the lead sponsor of this bill, and so she goes into the cloakroom. And you've met Jon Lewis.
I have, yeah.
I'm sure. Like, it just utterly oozes like charisma and moral gravitas. Yes. And you've got Jon Lewis telling you ProPublica is not right about this. They're not reading that right. And also there's and maybe even if they are, there's all these other good things in the bill that are so much better. And so even if they're right, it's worth doing this. And so she comes out of the cloakroom and she's talking to her aide. She's like, Jon Lewis is making some really good arguments. And it's hard. And the aide told me, he's like, what could I say to her? Like, I'm not going to go tell Jon Lewis that he's a sellout. Like, you go tell Jon Lewis that he's a sellout. And so she's like, what do I do? He's like, you cannot vote for it. Like, you'll get killed. He's like, you should go in and ask for a recorded vote, and then vote against it, and it's going to pass. Everybody loves it. She's like, all right, I'll see what I'm going to do. And she goes onto the House floor, and she gives a 1-minute speech, where she praises Jon Lewis for all the work that he did on it. She then adds, this is a really bad provision, and we should strip this one out. And then, like, the moment of truth comes, the speaker gavels like, all in favor, aye. Everybody's aye. All in favor, no. And that's when usually somebody says, I request a recorded vote. But if nobody says that,
the ayes carry. And
the ayes carry it. And she and Katie Hill were the only ones who had raised any objections. She couldn't, none of the other squad wanted to do it either. No objections, ayes carry it. Because in that moment, she couldn't kind of she didn't want to be the one who was going to put all of her colleagues on record. But at the same time, people are like, yeah, but that's what you're there for. And then the outrage, grew even further, and the Senate was like, okay, we're not doing this, because there was so much outrage. People are like, really? You're going to pass a law that says we can't file our taxes for free? Like, we already have to pay you the taxes. Now we have to pay the taxes.
Yeah, Uncle Sam.
So, but as her aide was saying, it's easy to judge, but also you try it. Like, it's really it's difficult stuff.
And there's something it's very poignant and sad to be at this point where some of this has been so demoralizing for someone like AOC, someone who takes this chance to become a member of Congress and kind of runs headlong into the realities of this job, a job that was ugly and difficult, even when there wasn't a kind of recalcitrant and fascistic right-wing movement in this country. This is a moment where I think a lot of the left feels demoralized, regardless of, I think that you see a debate over, especially people that are like very engaged about how much credit do you give someone like Joe Biden for efforts on student loans, even though you can't hold him responsible for the court for the biggest investment in climate in history, for playing his hand as well as he could. At the same time, you see this divisive debate over Israel that has alienated a lot of people on the left who are critical of the Biden administration's failure to call for a ceasefire, a permanent ceasefire. What do you, as someone watching how the sort of relationship between the center left and the left, there was this piece by Robert Kagan everybody's been talking about that we're on the cusp of a dictatorship from Trump, and one of the points he makes, among a lot of worst case scenario points, is the left is fractured. That is what happens in a country that is vulnerable to this. What do you see in your reporting as a path to reminding or cajoling or convincing or making changes that make possible the left to come together?
And I think one thing that you see is a kind of loud element on social media that gets overplayed. I think broadly speaking, despite some of that noise that you were hearing up until October and this catastrophe in the Middle East, you actually were seeing the center left and the left, pretty well aligned. You had this remarkable moment during the fight over Build Back Better and the Inflation Reduction Act, his gigantic, Biden's gigantic social spending and climate package, where it was the people in the swing districts that were teaming up with the Progressive Caucus saying, we need this. Like, we need something to run on. You've got to pass this child care stuff, pass this affordable care stuff. We need these subsidies so we can, in fact, pass the climate stuff so we can tell people what we've done so we can get reelected. You remember that was the opposite back in 2009, 2010. Any moderates who voted for the Affordable Care Act or voted for the climate bill did so believing that they had hurt themselves.
Yeah.
And probably correctly.
Several believe
Yeah.
they voted, passed the Affordable Care Act, and then lost their seats.
Lost their seats as a result, but they did it anyway. As you know, they're like, that's why I'm in office. I'm willing to do it. That was not the case this time. Their political incentives and their kind of ethical values lined up. They're like, we need this. So you got to a place where the left and the center left were rowing like in the same direction against just a handful of marginalized Democrats. Kyrsten Sinema, who's not even a Democrat anymore. Joe Manchin, who's gonna be gone, might run as a third party candidate, and then Josh Gottheimer and his what he called them the unbreakable nine that were going to kind of stop Biden's agenda. So you're back in 2009, 2010. It was scores of these types that you had to deal with. And now you're talking about fewer than a dozen of these recalcitrants. So the party's coming together in a more progressive direction. But what this catastrophe in Gaza does to that, we don't know, because we could just be, even as horrific as it's been, we might be even just at the beginning of what we're going to see.
Well, that's a terrible fucking place to leave it. Any sort of surprising moments in reporting this book with AOC, with the squad, about what it is like for them to be in Congress that are of a slightly happier tenor than
well, there was one cool moment where it all worked together for everybody: the far angry left, the squad, the progressive caucus,
the far angry left,
and the center left.
Please, like, call me Mr. Angry Left. Wait, that doesn't make sense. The far angry left was my father.
Mr. Far Angry Left. And during the American Rescue Plan, that was his first one, this $1.9 trillion package that he pushed that had the direct checks, the unemployment stuff. They tried to put a $15 minimum wage in. The parliamentarian, it's a whole story we don't need to get into, says you can't do this. Bernie puts it up for a vote. They don't have the 60 they need. And so the far angry left is just incredibly, absolutely angry. And so now you have Manchin saying he also wants to trim back the checks. He thinks the unemployment stuff is too generous. You're seeing so much fury.
I was far and angry then.
Yes, exactly.
We all were.
And the squad is very publicly pushing back. Like, this is outrageous. You already took out the minimum wage. Now you're going to try to take out this while we're in the middle of this. And so Jayapal and Schumer had developed a relationship over the last couple of years. And so Jayapal told Schumer, look, if Manchin does this, like, they're walking. And the threat had real credibility to it. She's like, don't blame me, but they are out of here. You see how much pressure they're under. So Manchin came to him and to make these demands, these cuts, and Schumer was able to tell him, Joe, like, I can't do that. If I do that, Pramila tells me I lose the squad. And so then Manchin, for the first time, a centrist Democrat had been put in a position of actually facing a credible threat from the left. Because usually the left, remember 60 Democrats in 2009 said, if there's no public option, we're not signing off on Obamacare. They all voted for Obamacare because it's like, it's still a good bill. It's still going to save some lives. So most progressives are going to go along with it. But there was so much anger, so much organizing that it was credible. And Manchin caved. He's like, I'd rather have the bill than get these cuts. That doesn't happen much, but it shows that there's like an actual path where you can use the anger of the left in a productive way and get something that was extremely popular. Biden's popularity up through his first 6 months was, he's never seen approval numbers like that again.
Well, you brought us back down a little.
Sorry. But that was good.
But that was good.
Yeah.
But that was good. Everybody, thank you, Ryan, so much.
Thank you.
Ryan Grim, the book is The Squad, AOC, and the Hope of a Political Revolution. Everybody check it out. That's great. Thank you.